Finding tenants is extremely easy. You could get a lease signed tomorrow if you wanted to. However, finding good tenants is a little trickier. As a real estate investor, the last thing you want to be dealing with is a bad tenant. You'll be constantly getting phone calls at all hours of the day, and every single one of their problems will become yours. Especially in Ontario, everybody knows by now how much of a nightmare it can be to get rid of a bad tenant. So in this video, I'm going to share 5 things that you can do in order to maximize your chances of finding that perfect tenant who's going to pay rent on time and treat your property as if it was their own. Hey, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Steve LoPresti. I'm a real estate agent and property manager here in Hamilton, Ontario. So if you have any questions that has to do with real estate investing, property management, or just finding tenants, feel free to reach out to me. My number is up on the screen. Now, the first thing you're going to want to make sure you do in order to find a good tenant is to purchase the right property. Now, this may seem obvious, but buying the right property in the right area will attract higher quality tenants, which will have higher standards and therefore fewer problems for you to deal with. It's always important that you do extensive research before purchasing any investment property. This is why it's important to speak to somebody who knows the area, especially if you're from a different city, someone who knows the areas that are good, and more importantly, the areas to avoid. Hamilton is a great city for real estate investing, provided you buy in the right area. There's also quite a few rough spots in Hamilton that you're going to want to avoid. It's also a good idea if you're thinking of buying a particular house to drive through the neighborhood, maybe take a walk around. So you're going to want to take a look at the other types of houses that are on the street, like what condition are they in, what type of cars are the people driving, is it mostly families that live here, right? So if you see a lot of minivans, that might indicate there's a lot of families living there, or if you see a lot of children playing outside. Doing this will also just help you get a feel for the area, like how safe it is. So a good rule of thumb is if you wouldn't personally feel comfortable living in an area, chances are your tenants won't either. Now, this also applies to the property itself. Is the property in very poor condition? Now, if that's the case, it's not always a deal breaker. That's actually quite a great opportunity because you can increase the value of it by doing a quality renovation. And that will also increase your rental price and rental demand. Now, if you've already bought a property in a pretty bad area and you're realizing now after the fact and selling it is not an option, there are still a few things you can do, right? You can see what you can do to make the condition of the property nicer, so that you can attract higher quality tenants. The rest of these tips will still be helpful for you. All right, so the second thing you're going to want to keep in mind is the pricing of the unit. It's important that you don't just pick a random number based on what your mortgage amount is, because you're not going to get it. And by the time you realize that, you're going to lose even more money. You need to pick a price according to what the market wants, not what you want. A lot of landlords will make the mistake of overpricing the unit in order to feel out the market, but all this does is it makes good tenants ignore your property. Put yourself in their shoes. If you saw 2 units that were identical and one unit was $100 cheaper, would you bother going to the more expensive one and trying to haggle with them, or just go to the cheaper one and put in your application there? All the tenants are going to be going to the cheaper ones first, the ones that are listed at market value, and then the good ones are going to get their applications accepted, and then you are going to be left with all the bad ones that couldn't get accepted anywhere else. Whether you're listing a house for sale or for rent, you want to drive as much traffic to the listing as possible. You want to get as many eyes on it as you can, right? Supply and demand. The more people that are interested in it, the more demand there is for your rental unit, the more negotiating power that you have, and the more selective you can be when picking a tenant. All right, so the third thing when it comes to finding a high quality tenant is to take your time and be patient. Now, I understand that you have a mortgage and other expenses you need to pay for. You might be getting a little bit desperate, and it can be pretty tempting to accept that subpar application that you have in front of you. However, you need to consider the cost of dealing with a bad tenant. Not only can it take months to get rid of them if you end up having to go the legal route, you'll also have extra expenses with filing fees and paralegal fees. There's also the opportunity cost of missed rent during that period if, for whatever reason, they have decided not to pay, or if that's the reason why you're going the legal route in the first place. There's also the potential for them to cause extensive damage to your unit that can total thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to replace. And on top of all that, there's the stress and headache that comes along with dealing with these issues. So if, like most people, you got into real estate investing in order to create wealth and financial freedom for yourself so that you can spend your time on your own terms, the last thing you want to be dealing with is bad tenants. It's going to make that 9 to 5 you're trying to escape look pretty enticing. Now, I'm not trying to scare you. This is very much a worst case scenario. I'm just trying to highlight what can happen if you focus too much on what's happening in the short term and you rush the process and put a bad tenant in there. It's better to deal with a month or 2 of carrying costs than getting impatient and putting a bad tenant in your property because you have bills to pay. The amount of money you could potentially lose in the long run is much greater. Now, the fourth thing you can do to find high quality tenants is to thoroughly screen them when you get their application. Again, don't rush this. When you're showing the unit, have a conversation with them, get to kind of to know what they're like, how they think, how they view the world, just who they are as a person in general, because you're going to be potentially dealing with this person for the next year, maybe longer. You'll also want to collect a completed application form. The standard OREA rental application form is pretty good, but you can also make your own. Some key things you're going to want to know is how many people are going to be living in the unit, what is their income, who is their employer, do they have any pets, and if so, what breed, what type of pet, and how many pets, and if their financial situation maybe isn't the greatest, but otherwise you think they'd make a good tenant, do they have a co-signer who can help them out financially. It's also a good idea to collect an employment letter and a credit report, and you're going to want to call all their references and their previous landlords. You're going to want to verify what they told you in person with what is actually on their application, and then you're going to want to call their employer as well, verify their hours that they've worked, how long they've worked there, roughly what their pay is, and so on. And if anything is left blank on the application, make sure to actually ask them for it. You want to verify everything that they tell you and that they put on their application. Do not just take them on their word. If anything is left blank on the application, you want to make sure that you actually ask them about it. It's been my experience that most people are good and most people are honest, but there are a few bad ones out there that will take advantage of you if you let them. Make sure that every bit of information they give you is verified. This may seem like a lot of work, and to be honest, it is, but doing this work up front will allow you to avoid a lot of problems and a lot of headaches down the road. About 80% of the problems that come from property management can be avoided by placing the proper tenants up front. I'll be putting out a video going a little bit more in depth into tenant screening, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. And the fifth and final tip I can give you is to treat your tenants right. This goes not only for the application process when you're showing them the unit, but also when you actually give them the keys and they've moved in. While it is important to set the right expectations up front and to be professional, it's also important that you make their experience as positive as you can. Remember to be kind and courteous whenever you're dealing with them. And if any issues like maintenance come up, make sure that you deal with them promptly. And if it's something that's going to take a little bit longer to deal with, make sure you let them know that you are on top of it and a solution is being put in place. Now, if a problem comes up with the tenant themselves, say they lose their job and they're having trouble paying rent, see if you can come up with some sort of solution like a payment plan. Don't just immediately bring down the hammer whenever dealing with an issue. If you treat them right, they are more likely to reciprocate when the time comes. They're more likely to pay their rent on time and they'll be more respectful of the property. It's also important to keep in mind that since your tenant lives on the property and you don't, they're there every single day and they're more aware of any potential issues that can cause further damage, such as a broken downspout. If they actually like and respect you because you've been fair and courteous when dealing with them, they're more likely to notify you of such issues so that you can replace them before further damage happens. And if you treat them poorly, they're not going to feel bad about pouring bacon grease down the drain or those holes they left in the drywall and so on. When the time comes for them to give you notice that they're moving out, they'll probably leave it to the last minute, leaving you to scramble to find a new tenant. So make sure to treat your tenants right if you want their tenancies to go a lot smoother. So those were 5 tips for finding the perfect tenant in Ontario. Now, even if you do everything right, there's nothing you could have done better, chances are you might be dealing with a bad tenant at some point. It's bound to happen, especially if you're building up a large real estate portfolio. If that happens, it's not the end of the world. Just make sure you view it as a learning experience and also make sure that you have the proper team in place that can help you out in the event that that happens. If you want to know more about finding a good tenant, or if you currently are dealing with a bad tenant situation and you would like some advice, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to help. And if you liked this video and found some value in it, don't forget to like and subscribe. It would really help me out. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.